On today's episode, I'm going to make a monster out of these. So, around Valentine's Day, while I was making all of these different roses, I had this idea that I could totally make a monster rose. However, I figured that was probably not the best idea for during the summer, but hey, it's spooky season, so now I can do whatever I want. I will admit that I am absolutely horrible at drawing, so I didn't give you an overview of what I was seeing in my head. If I find an easier way to get my point across, I will do that in the future. However, for this video, I decided the best way to start this project was with the eye flower. I started with black to make the eyeball in the typical amigurumi style. If you need an overview of that, you basically are doing a set amount of stitches the first round, and then you are increasing each round by that same amount of stitches. So here I started off with 6 single crochet, so the next round would be 12, then 18, and so on. Then I worked a few rounds even, and then I decreased each round using the same amount of stitches until the piece was closed to make a ball. As you can see, I did have to experiment with this as I knew roughly how big I wanted the eyeball to be, but I didn't know how that translated into rounds. I ended up doing a couple rounds in black, then I switched to white to finish the eyeball and work that to my liking. When I was happy with the eyeball, I started on the mouth for the next flower. I began with the black and worked that a bit bigger than the black for the eyeball. This monster definitely needed a big mouth. When I was happy with the size of that, I switched over to the white. Now, for this round, I stitched every other stitch in either one or two rounds previous. This gave me that big tooth look that I was looking for. I also did maintain the increase for this round, so in that way I could keep this disc count flowing and growing. A few increased rounds for the green, and I was satisfied enough for a few even rounds, and then I started on the decreasing to make more of a disc shape. I did want the mouth to be a little bit more inset into the flower than what the eyeball is meant to be, so that is why I worked it in such a way. Day 2. Now that the gremlin has gotten done doing gremlin-y things, it is back to the monster flower. So, um, got the eyeball done, got the nasty tooth-filled mouth done, and now it is on to the petals. For the rose petals, I used the same technique from a video tutorial I saw years ago. I will link that video in the description below. This is my go-to rose. I love how the petals do a curve inwards, which ended up hugging the eyeball near perfectly. For the eyeball rose, I did start off with the green and I worked this up so in that way I had some petals that were green to act as the leaf. For the mouth, however, I did do a solid red because I was wondering if I was going to be running out of the green. So I neglected that part. In hindsight, I probably could have gotten away with working the same for the mouth. I did end up going back and created a shorter rose in just green, so then that way I could add it to the back of the mouth, just so then that way I had some leaves in there. The next day I came back to make the body. I forgot to turn off the autofocus, so I am sorry for the pulsing of the camera. But back to the body. This I worked the same way as I worked the mouth and the eyeball, only larger. And I also worked a longer amount of even rows. And so I am this far on the body so far. I did get this also up the other night. Still need to sew this one up. However, I do have the body done this far. I am going to take a bit of a break and be back at it shortly. And when I came back, I ended up decreasing in a slightly different way. I ended up working a decreased round, and then for the next round, I would do an even round. Okay, and for the legs for my little monster, I am going to be making these leaf shapes. There's going to be 4 total, and in order to support them a little bit better, I have 18 gauge wire. A This is going to be about 23 inches long. Hey, go figure. Um, that is how long my cutting mat is. Anyway, so I am going to go ahead and work this into my stitches for this next row. Oh, I think I should have enough. And I can bend it as needed. Working over this wire was a little bit tricky for me. This is the first time that I have actually been crocheting over jewelry wire, so it was a little bit tricky, but I managed to do it. Okay, so I started off this round with my little uh, bent 18 gauge wire. Now I have the straight from the end of the last stitch. So now what I'm going to do is just make sure that everything is lying flat. Won't always be laying flat, but at least for this part we want it laying flat. And then I come in with my wire cutters. They kind of look like that. And I am going to go in and just trim close to, but not exactly onto. And shoot wire all over the place because that's fun. My little round ones are what I'm going to use to grab and just kind of bend these around so then that way they're not pokey. If you are making this or something similar to this for a child, you probably want to omit this part and use something a little bit less pokey, especially if they're going to be playing with it. And one thing I like too about this part is to get these guys so they're kind of interconnected, like such. Of course, finish off your work. Like, why is there still a loop on there? And then you can use your flat nose to kind of pinch this stuff down and a little bit more closed so it doesn't come running out. 'tis done. I wish I was better at drawing because I could show you what was in my head to how it came out in stitches because this is remarkably close to how I was thinking it would come out. So yay. Um, Super happy with how it did turn out. However, there are some things I would do differently. Where I have the stitches over the wires. In some places, you can see the wires. So I would probably end up okay. So I think I would try to cover the wires just a little bit better with stitches. Where I did a double stitch in order to do an increase, seemed to cover them up really well. So probably what I would do is I would end up just, if it makes sense, doing uh, two stitch together in the same stitch, if that makes sense. So like a single crochet, I would do two single crochet togethers in that one stitch just to make it that thicker without increasing the stitch count at all. So I am happy with how this turned out. I did end up looking like I was going to run out of, or get closer to being out of the red heart yarn. So I did get into the stash and got out this loops and threads impeccable in forest, I believe it is, deep forest, which I think matches close enough, but yet also gives a little bit of a detail too to the leaves and the I did it for the outer of the leaves and for the curly cues on this piece. So yeah, I am actually really happy with how this came out again. Yeah, the other thing about it I would might change is I would just do one big blob in the back instead of trying to do this taller neck look. I don't know, I think I was going after brontosaurus look or something. But yeah. So this is how it turned out. If you did like this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. If you are able to, hit that hype because I could use all the help I could get. I'm trying to reach 500 subscribers by the end of the year. I'm there, but yet I'm not there. So, shameless plug. Anyway, until next time, bye.